Now, to talk more about the key outcomes and takeaways from this year's Climate Summit, let's bring in Ted Nace. Ted is Executive Director of the information database Global Energy Monitor. Good to have you with us.
Oh, great to be with you. Thank you.
So I want to start with what you saw as the biggest takeaways and achievements that have come out from COP26.
Well, frankly, the biggest achievement is actually one that wasn't particularly tangible, but it was highly symbolic. It was the agreement between John Kerry and Xie Zhenhuan to work together. And this is a really important step forward.
And that was certainly something that we've seen highlighted. Now, we also saw some reports that have said that the new language included in the preliminary COP26 draft agreement is groundbreaking. Why that description?
Well, I don't think everyone shares that view. I think if you look at the actual formal diplomatic takeaways from COP26, it's actually pretty thin. There's some pretty vague language about ending coal subsidies, about phasing out fossil fuels, but compared to the size of the problem and to the speed at which action really needs to happen on climate, it's just very little to take away from such an important conference.
And obviously we did see that frustration. I mean, talk about what led to hundreds of COP26 delegates walking out before the summit had ended.
Well, that's right. I mean, we have very little time to deal with the climate crisis. And one of the problems is that the most powerful economies in the world also happen to be the largest fossil fuel producers. So, for example, China is the largest coal producer by a factor of 5. The United States is the largest oil producer. So that's why I said that the agreement between the United States to work together is so important, because the Cold War dynamic that's been going on in recent years between China and the United States is actually quite unhelpful for China, for climate. These two economies and the diplomatic relations between them are absolutely essential. We have a problem that is really where economics and technology are not the obstacle. The obstacle really are the economic vested interests at stake that will stand to lose in solving the climate crisis, in shifting to a clean economy. And so for the largest economies to get together and say we're going to take this on is a really important first step. They have to work together. And this is the dynamic I think that Kerry and Xie Zhenhuan put in place.
And obviously, I mean, you do have these different economies at different stages of development. So what have been the biggest sticking points in the negotiations when you have so many different interests?
Well, frankly, the biggest sticking point is that the COP process requires unanimity among every country, but some countries are completely tied to fossil fuels, including the United States. And so in order to accommodate those countries, the mechanisms have become incredibly weak. So it's basically a voluntary agreement. The other thing is that the historical legacy of climate change is a sticking point, because the countries that caused the climate crisis are essentially the Western economies that have been producing carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases for so long. Well, you can't expect the climate crisis to be solved by the countries which haven't solved the crisis, which still have to expand their economies in order to achieve economic parity. So always the key to solving the climate crisis has been to get the richer countries to actually step up. And that still really hasn't happened.
So how much movement did we see on existing pledges versus, say, some of these new pledges on things like being tougher on the use of fossil fuels and subsidies?
I have to be candid and say we didn't really see much progress at all. So basically, countries are entrenched in protecting their national industries, and that is going to have to change. Some much greater civil society pressure will have to be brought to bear. And one thing I would point out is that most corporations in the world really do not have any stake in continuing fossil fuels as the basis of the economy. Most your Procter and Gamble's, your ordinary consumer companies, none of those companies have anything to gain from climate change. It's only oil companies and coal companies, really. So the vast majority, both of the economic and business players, and of course civil society, the vast majority of all countries really wants this problem to be solved. So it's really down to a very small number of interests that are blocking progress.
Certainly interesting to keep in mind. Thank you so much. Ted Nace there, Executive Director at Global Energy Monitor.